Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom Thoughts. This podcast is going to be something a little different for me, something I've never done in my podcast before here. This is a completely call-in oriented podcast. I got a lot of call-ins in response to my last episode. And so there were going to be enough that with those call-ins and with my responses that was going to be a good length where I could split it to have a call-in episode and not have it turn my next episode into like an hour and a half marathon. But we're going to get calls from Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. We're going to hear from Anthony of the Casting Shadows podcast. We're going to hear from Shay from the Roleplay Rescue podcast. And we're going to hear from a first-time caller, EOTB from the Classic Adventure Gaming podcast. And links to all their podcasts, and a couple of them have some blogs going on. Links to those blogs will be in the show notes. And I hope you enjoy, because there's a lot of good thoughts, good insights, good shout outs, point outs in some of these calls, and so let's get to it.
Hey, Jason here. Thank you for episode 80. Thank you for answering everybody's calls and giving your thoughts on those. You know, regarding this reading a muster, I'm not sure how railroading is a bad term, but inauthentic is okay. Either way, you're doing the bad, wrong, fun thing, because there are tons of different kinds of players out there, and maybe you could say this style plays the war game way, this style plays not the war game way, but by saying it's inauthentic, the people that enjoy playing those ways, now you're just putting them down. So I don't see how that's any different than using the term railroading. So he kind of lost me there. And I think each group, I think the important thing is for players and referees to decide what kind of play they enjoy and to discuss that before the game starts to make sure that this is going to be a game that's going to be played in a style that everybody's going to enjoy.
Hey, Pink Phantom, it's Jay from Roleplay Rescue. Just wanted to phone in. Jason Connolly put me on to episode 80, and I'm just so grateful that you mentioned my podcast, which is great. And I was listening to a little bit of reading from the book on authentic play. I balked a little bit at that language. Authentic, inauthentic. It has a sort of judgment to it, I think. I don't know. Maybe it's just the way I interpret the words, but I was a little uncomfortable. And I feel like, really, for me, the language would be engaged or otherworld immersed, character immersed, those kinds of things, but not to say that somebody who is playing as you kind of like currently do with your solo play, it seems like to be hovering over the board, moving the miniatures, playing with the rules and learning them in that way. I do that too, and I really enjoy that. And I would not say it is inauthentic to play in that way. I would say absolutely that's as authentic as anything. It's just the way we play, right? And I don't know. I also, as much as I talk a lot about wanting immersive play, I love moving minis around a battlefield. It's good fun. I like wargaming. So, I don't know. I just wanted to say that. I just want to let you know. And just thank you for shouting out and for doing the cast. Game on.
Thank you both for calling in. I will admit that I did not have the same reaction to the terminology of authentic and inauthentic that you guys did upon reading the book, both in terms of when I first read it and in terms of reading it for the podcast. And the listening to your calls made me question why. Why did I not have that same reaction? Because he also uses the term railroading in there, and he tries to contrast the idea of authentic, what he means by authentic and railroading. And I think there's a couple of reasons. The first reason is that he presents authentic and inauthentic as a duality. Inauthentic is not a wrong way to play, but it is a wrong way to play if you're trying to play the wargaming way. And when I went back and looked at the book to see if I could see what I had missed, because it's certainly possible reading it to miss, especially reading it out loud for the podcast, to have missed something that someone just hearing it is going to pick up on. What struck me was he defined what authentic was in his context. In fact, let me see if I can find that part real quick here. Flipping around pages, it's great podcasting. Here we are. Authenticity is valuable. I think the purpose of playing in the wargaming way is to set up a meaningful scenario and resolve it with the group's own wisdom and judgment. I call it authenticity when this happens. And I think when I first read that section, and let me go on to this next sentence because I think it applies as well. The opposite of authentic gaming is experiencing what amounts to a media presentation created in advance. So, in my mind, he was at that moment in the book contrasting RPGs, and particularly playing an RPG in the wargaming way, with a more passive experience of media. And he said several times throughout this book that he considers playing the wargaming way as more than just playing a game or entering a world. That there's kind of purpose to it. There's an academic purpose to it. I don't remember exactly the term he used. I don't remember where he said it, so I'm not going to try to look it up. I'll try to get to it later. But he, there's an academic learning, experiencing aspect to it that I think he equates to the wargaming way that I haven't heard the way he equates it, even though I can't quote exactly what he said, equates it to other ways of playing in the wargaming way, even some of the more immersive styles that Che, that you've covered, and Anthony with the Casting Shadows podcast had talked about, and I believe Daniel Jones of the Primeval Fantasy podcast talks about. And so I think that the fact that he kind of defined, and now that I look back on it, the definition is not as defined as I guess it was fixed in my mind when I first read it. But the fact that he defined what to him what he meant by authentic play, and so when he was going into inauthentic and defined what he thought of inauthentic play, where it's more akin to that consumptive style of play where you're just following an already existing story. I thought that was clearer than, just generally saying my way is authentic and your way is inauthentic. Also, I think that the fact that it's a duality, authentic and inauthentic, versus there is no, I think, commonly used term that people use for the opposite of railroading. When people say, okay, railroading is this, so it's just not railroading. Now that I say it out loud, that doesn't make nearly as much sense. But I guess it's when people define railroading, it's defined negatively first, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Whereas authentic, he tried to define the positive value first, so that the negative value could be seen as just simply the absence of the positive value, whereas railroading is defined as the negative value. And then options are given as to here is how you don't railroad. But the negative value is the primary value in that discussion, if that makes if that makes sense. And two, some of it may simply be having read through the book and read through many passages several times, that I more follow the thought process that he has. So it makes more consistent sense to me that I see it as him simply expressing what his style of play is versus saying other styles of play is different or wrong. So that he's approaching it from, I'm defining what I like and I'm choosing these terms. And in fact, the terminology that he used in the book that I had the most visceral response to, akin to what the two of you were saying about authentic and inauthentic, was when he was talking about hygienic and unhygienic practices in gaming. And those kind of disturbed me until I got to the glossary where he defined what hygienic was, and just somehow that he sat down to define it, and it wasn't defined in a way that was meant to cast aspersions on the way others played the game. That kind of assuaged my reaction to it. And in fact, I've had that reaction to another, is it an adjective, adverb, adjective, that I've heard used in several different podcasts and several different contexts in terms of dealing with more immersive styles of play, that it's richer if you're more immersed in your character. And the first few times I heard that, I bristled at that. But then as I listened more to the particular individuals who were using that terminology, and the podcasts where I ran across them more often than others, and became more familiar with the people, I realized that they weren't using this as a way to demean other ways of play. They were just using it descriptively in what they had experienced when they had been able to achieve that immersive quality in a role-playing game. But it really is a very interesting thing to bring up. How descriptive can you be with the style of play that you prefer? And how can you do that doesn't necessarily seem like an immediate backhand to the way other people play? And that's because that's something that I see in social media a lot, where people react to a post or they make a post of their own, and it seems to be aimed at someone. It seems to be aimed at a group of people, or a particular game style, or a particular game set of game rules. And it's meant to belittle them for doing things the way that they do, or for the rule set to be what it is. Oh, and I almost forgot. I think the second reason why I didn't have that same visceral reaction is, just as I said, when I don't, running across something like that, it depends on where I see it. Again, going back to what I just said about social media, you see something on social media, a lot of times it seems to be aimed at someone. And usually these are pretty, short posts or whatever. So there's not a lot of detail, what have you. And encountering a clarifier like that, a descriptor like authentic, inauthentic, railroading, richer, what have you, is different in that short context, that individual context, sometimes that back and forth context between a couple of people or a small group of people, and something that's written in a book or blog, something that is personal to the author that is writing it. The author is writing of their experience and of their way of play. And unless they're specifically taking target at an individual or something within that blog post or book, it seems more acceptable to use that terminology. So that's probably another reason why I didn't have that initial response. Although, as I said, with hygienic and unhygienic, I had that response. Although I think some of that is because how often do you come across the term hygienic outside of, like a medical context? So I think the combination of surprise and the way it was used was as much because it kind of brought attention to itself. Whereas you hear the word authentic all the time. I mean, people use this is authentic, that is authentic. I think there are restaurants that say the authentic pizza or authentic burger joint or what have you that describe themselves that way. Anyway, I think I'm losing coherency here, so I'm going to stop. But thank you guys for calling in. That really was some thought-provoking calls there from you guys, and I do appreciate that.
Hello, Pink Phantom. This is Anthony calling from the Casting Shadows podcast. Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast tipped me off this morning that your recent episode called Authenticity mentioned my podcast. And I'm a couple episodes behind because I'm curious about your take on Muster. I haven't read it yet, and I'm not sure that I will, but I am interested in it. But so I'm interested in what you have to say about it and how you're going through it and how you're applying it to your podcast. But I leapt ahead this morning to hear why I might have been mentioned and if I should call in and that kind of stuff. So here's my call. As a wargamer myself, largely skirmish play, smaller units with occasional forays into ridiculously large battles, I do tend to find that play can be immersive, but very differently. My very first time playing a war game of any type was actually playing BattleTech when that game was pretty new, and it was almost immediately an immersive experience. And from an in-character perspective, I could imagine the mech. The mech that I was playing was the mech on the cover of the box, so it was a really big artwork to base my imaginations on, and they're anthropomorphic models, and even though we were playing with just paper standees, it's evocative art. The map was cool, the experience was interesting, the rules that we were using weren't that difficult, and it was just very easy to get caught up into the idea of what would the pilot do, what's a good thing to do, what would I do. That transition from thinking about it as something that's being controlled by you to thinking about it as you taking those actions. It's a very easy transition to make, much like we have in the role-playing game experience. But that in-character connection isn't all that immersion is. Any activity that's sufficiently compelling and interesting and taxing enough to require focused attention can lead to immersion, whether that's like we've talked about on the podcast, performing martial arts or gardening or doing a lot of math or that sort of thing. So I could imagine that once you get to a point with your solo play with AD&D, with all the different ways that you're processing, small, medium, and large battles, at a certain point, all of that information would be internalized, and you need the charts less and less, and more of it is coming directly from your memory and your internalization of the procedure. And at that point, I would be pretty sure that experience could easily become immersive if if the other conditions were right. You weren't also having to pay attention to something else like kids or dogs or cooking or what have you. If you could just solely focus on the play, there's no reason why the hallmarks of immersive play wouldn't be noticed in hindsight. And one of those that I found, especially from playing chit-based war games, which I don't find particularly immersive, I don't find particularly inspiring to my imagination, but they do really hold my attention. I really need to concentrate on exactly what I want to do and where all my various units are and how they work together to comprise an interesting and useful force. And when I think back on the game, I don't really remember the little cardboard chits and the paper maps. I tend to remember the units as I would imagine them when not playing the game. So it's kind of interesting how imagination can transition into memory. And talking with other wargamers, I find that experience is kind of common. But even just enjoying being with your friends can be an immersive experience. So anyway, I think that's all. I'm not going to talk about the railroading stuff, maybe in a second call. But anyway, keep it up. Really enjoying your travel through muster.
It's very interesting bringing up different types of immersion and then talking about chit and hex war games and how you didn't have that same type of immersion. But when you talk about different types of immersion, I know there are a couple of podcasts that I used to listen to. Well, I still do when they come out. They're infrequent on war games, board game war games, usually historical. And the folks in those podcasts and in some of the related forums, they talk a lot about how when they get a war game, they're interested in the subject, they're interested in the era of history or the particular battle or the style of warfare. And it's never just the war game. They'll get books, they'll do research, they'll watch films, they'll watch TV shows, they'll watch documentaries, and they'll get immersed in that world, in that realm. And when they play the game, they're not always playing it, as a game to win. A lot of times they're playing it to try to learn something about the era, to learn something about the style of warfare, or learn something about the particulars of the theater of operations, or maybe if it's a strategic or grand strategic level, about the political will and how that was involved in a war effort. And so they get involved with the games. They get immersed in the history that goes with the games they are playing. And they may play multiple games on a particular battle or particular area or particular time or particular form of warfare to try to get to know that. So, you're talking about how there's different types of immersion. You were talking about how there's different types of immersion and talking about how you didn't get the same kind of immersion in the war games. I just brought that all to mind when you said that about, and it's a good point about different types of immersion. And, it doesn't necessarily have to be about losing yourself in another world. You can simply be losing yourself in the moment. And that, whether that moment, as you said, is having fun with friends or enjoying the aspects of the game aspects of the game. So lots of different forms of immersion. And, again, I think that goes back to, a long time kind of, I guess, complaint or criticism about role playing, that even though it's 50 years old, we still don't have sort of defined terms and a language that we can use to express what RPGs can be about and what they can do. And so you get this particular battle of styles a lot of time, people claiming this is the way they should be played and this is the way they should be played, instead of them being explored as a medium. And I've never been one to say RPGs are art and they should be treated that way. And, because I see games as games. I think it's probably pretty obvious to people who listen to my podcast, my solo play, that I'm approaching a lot. There's a lot of above the board, moving the pieces around aspects, particularly because I'm exploring the world as much as I'm guiding characters through a dungeon. But I think there's something to that. There's something to saying there's more to role playing than just one way of doing it. And exploring those different ways is not wrong. It's not, about good and bad. It's really just about finding what you want to do with your recreative time. What do you get out of it? Do you want something that's just about fun? Do you want something that's just involved and involves your mind on an intellectual level? Do you want something that affects your emotions? And all these things are being explored now in our role playing world. So thanks a lot for that call. That was very thought provoking. Next, you're going to hear a series of calls from EOTB from the Classic Adventure Gaming Podcast. Classic Adventure Gaming Podcast. And they may sound a little out of order or broken up. He sent me several messages. One of them, he got cut off, and he was addressing a couple of issues, so I've tried to put them, and his next message was on the same subject, so I've tried to put them all together, and so they may be out of order because I think he mentions that it's the second one on one of them, but just know that's not him, that's me. But he had a lot to say, and he really got into some good stuff, really got into some good AD&D knowledge and some good ideas. And so I wanted to make sure I put them all together in a way that I could respond to kind of the separate ideas a little bit. And so I'm going to get to it.
Hey, second call, this on muster. So you mentioned wanting other people's thoughts on that. So when I heard the bit on authenticity, I immediately put that back to the football game example that led off the whole shebang, where he's talking about that game was inauthentic because they weren't keeping score. They weren't actually playing for anything, right? They were both going to use the rules to march up and down the field, but unlike a regular football game, there was no victor, there was no loser. So it was inauthentic because nothing was at stake. If nothing's driving your preparation or decision making during an activity because it will affect the outcome, then it's an inauthentic use of the activity because you're just out there having fun. And I think we've all played in football games where it's like that with our friends, where nobody's keeping score, and it plays totally differently than when you're actually playing a game. And I think this is what he's getting to. I do think what you're talking about with immersion ties into it, because, think about it. In a football game where you're playing for something, why you win or lose the game is apparent based upon the known rules of the game. You might not be thinking about it while you're playing it. I mean, you're making decisions in real time based on, what the other team is doing, how to get more yards, whatever. But in that post-game podium, when coaches and players get up, they usually discuss the events of the football game in relation to the rules. Like, we got to clean up our blocking and not hold guys like that. Or, we got to get out of the huddle quicker so we don't get false starts and stuff like that. So the rules are giving them an understanding in either foreknowledge or in retrospection about why the decisions that you made during the activity resulted in success or failure. And most of the time, if you're coming to that understanding retrospectively, it means you didn't win. But your knowledge of the rules helps you know what to clean up and do differently. So I do agree that you want to be immersive. You want people to just ping pong information back and forth. You want them to be in the moment, but the rules give context to that moment.
I think that's a good point. Actions within the game have context and meaning within both the situation of the game world and within the rules of the game you're playing. So those two things are, the bookends on the experience, so to speak. You need to have a grasp of that to make meaningful choices within the context of the game. And that's a great observation. That's all I can say about it. That's a great observation. So thank you.
Hey, Phantom, this is EOTB from the CAG podcast. I just was listening to episode 80. It's the first one I've listened to. Great episode, but I started calling with a few thoughts. On granularity and AD&D and mastery of it and all that stuff like that, just a quick note on that. I've noticed a lot of people think that if granularity is present in a game, it has to be understood and used and memorized before you play it. And that's not true. The number one rule in AD&D, Craig X says this over and over, is run it fast. Shed as much granularity as necessary for you to run it fast. You don't master AD&D before you run it. You master it by running it before you're ready, and then just folding in more and more of the granularity as the overall game becomes unconsciously familiar. So never stop or slow down play to look up granularity. Just look at the section in the D&G conducting the game. It talks about assigning reasonable probabilities for stuff that's, not in the rules. Just give it a flat percentage, roll the dice, and move on. That's also what you should do when you can't remember granularity. Just go ahead and move on. What you're doing with solo stuff, it's fine. But I'm just talking about if somebody's worried about running the game for people. So regarding book organization, look at the PDF bookmarks on your Player's Handbook and DMG. They're mostly the same bookmarks. The DMG is written as an appendix to the Player's Handbook, and it follows the Player's Handbook's organization. So if you want the easiest read of AD&D, cut your Player's Handbook pages into the DMG and the same bookmark sections at the beginning of that bookmark section, so that you're reading the Player's Handbook pages first and then the DMG pages after that within the same section. That'll make the game flow a lot better. I've got a couple of other thoughts, but I'll probably make separate calls for those because I'm running out of time. Talk to you later.
In this next couple of calls, we're going to hear from Jason and EOTB talking about pummeling in the AD&D pummeling rules that I went through as part of my last episode as part of my solo play.
One last thought on episode 80. It was great to hear you get to the pummeling rules. Hopefully at some point you also get to play with the overbearing rules and all that. But yeah, they're a lot of fun, and really they're not that hard, especially if you know you're going to come into that situation, because you can figure out all that detail ahead of time. But even if you don't have it figured out ahead of time, as you saw, it doesn't take too long to figure out the stats for each character that you need for those rules. So it's great to hear you use them.
Regarding pummeling, I've got great news. It's even faster than how you went through it. With people new to AD&D, I try to explain pummeling as Street Fighter combo mode. If you score a hit on that first percentile roll, you go into combo mode. You roll damage. If the damage says that it allows you to strike again, you just go straight to rolling another punch of damage. You don't have to roll the hit again. You keep rolling damage until you roll a damage result that doesn't end with strike again. So you might get in 1 punches, 2 punches, 6 punches in your combo mode. It doesn't matter how many punches you land. You keep going until you roll out of it. And with pummeling, you get 2 attacks per round, always. It doesn't matter how many attacks you normally get. Hey, DOTB again. Sorry, man. I've just started calling into you guys, and you all kind of have different, timers, and I never know when it's going to cut me off. But anyway, so pummeling, you get 2 attacks. You get 2 chances to go into combo mode. And it goes really fast because you're just doing all of this damage back and forth to each other. You come to resolution really quickly. And that's because pummeling doesn't kill you, right? Regular lethal combat is very metered. It's very measured because the consequences are so severe. With pummeling, the consequences if you get knocked out is no big deal unless you have 0 allies or they're all taken out too. And then it could be bad. But it doesn't immediately kill you. So it resolves much faster. And just one other thing on it, note that if you have heavy armor on, you have less of a chance to go into combo mode. But if your opponent has heavy armor on, your chance of staying in combo mode go down. It's really a nice little system where it's better off if you're lightly armored to go into combo mode, but if you're lightly armored and you do get hit, then you're more likely to take a beating. So it's just a very fun little system. It goes very fast. It's great for fist fights. And I think that a lot of people don't engage with it because, again, of this perceived granularity thing, which I think is really unfortunate because once you use the same modifiers in 3 or 4 fist fights, then it just, you know exactly what you're going to do every time. So anyway, great episode. Enjoyed it. Hope you are enjoying your solo play through AD&D. Talk to you later.
You sent me back to the books with this one too. But as much as I like that concept of the combo. Going back to the rules, I don't think they read that way. Uh, of course, he uses like 4 different terms for what's going on there. He uses attacks and blows and strikes and punches. But in terms of the actual rules, it says that there's 2 pummeling attacks per round. I remember that part from the rules. The rules say there will be multiple blows within an attack, but it also says that the attacker determines if a strike is successful and then whether it does any damage. And when you go to the pummeling table, it uses the terms blow, strike, and punch interchangeably. And three of the possible results include strike again. So since he uses the specific language, the attacker determines if a strike is successful and then whether or not it does any damage. To me, that means that you have to see if the punch, the blow, the strike landed first, and then go to the damage table after that. And one thing I would have liked to have seen with the weaponless combat options, pummeling, grappling, overbearing, would have been some example combats like you used in the regular combat section. But going back to the rules, I did realize I did miss the very first part of that section. I went straight to pummel and missed the variable applicable to all pummeling, grappling, and overbearing attacks, where you look at where the attack, what column the attacker uses on the attack matrix, and then add to that a D6. And then for the defender, you do the same thing and add a D4. And they have the opportunity to use those numbers to change the base chance to hit or to change the potential result of a successful pummel, overbear, or grapple attack, which is, an interesting little dueling mini game between the two combatants. Do I use my variable to mitigate damage because I think there's no way to prevent I'm going to prevent being hit, or do I use it to try to prevent being hit completely, or try to make it more likely I'm going to hit, or try to make it so I can do better damage when I do hit? So that was something I had missed completely. So, thank you for making me go back to that, because I picked up on something else interesting about that part of the rule set. And as far as the message length, there used to be, you'll find a lot of these folks, a lot of these podcasts where we're calling into each other, and originated once upon a time in a podcaster app called Anchor, and that was bought by Spotify. And back when it was an independent app, within the app you could send a message, and you could make a favorites list of your podcasts, and so you could go straight to that. You could listen to your podcast on there, you could go straight to that podcast page, and you could send a message all within the app. And those messages are about a minute long. And that functionality is still available as part of Spotify for podcasters, but not within the app, only on the web. And I think you have to be logged in to do it now. I've heard a lot of people complaining. I haven't gotten a message from that in I don't know how long. It's been a long time. So, but that was kind of a unifying, the unifying mechanic of a group of us that are podcasting about RPGs. And after that went away, people have tried to find different ways to do it, and unfortunately, they all have different lengths. If you still manage to do it through Spotify for podcasters, like I said, it's a minute. If you do it through SpeakPipe, it's 90 seconds. I don't know the exact length. I'm going by your message that got cut off, that the limit on Google Voice is 2.5 minutes, because I think your message was right at 2.5 minutes when I cut off and you had to add it back in. And then, of course, if you just record an audio message and send it via Discord or via email, then you can make that whatever length you want. But yeah, it's I kind of liked the shorter ones because it made me focus. I have a bad habit of rambling, as you may have heard. And so it made me focus more on getting to the point, and or at least trying to, limit myself to maybe 2 messages instead of 5, which I would probably more want to do if I just recorded an audio stream and then sent it to somebody. I don't remember who it was. I sent a long audio stream to somebody, and I was like, you don't have to play that, man. You do not have to play that. That was way too long. But yeah, it's something weird that you just have to get used to. You have to figure out what each individual app is going to do. But I do thank you for all the calls. I really appreciate anytime anybody sends me feedback on the show. That's part of the community I got into, and so I consider that kind of the norm. And I consider it, I know how hard it is to, a lot of times, you may be listening to a podcast and you want to respond, but you're in a position you can't, and then, life happens and you don't. I'm very bad about doing that myself. I need to get better at that. But so I always appreciate whenever anybody responds to the show. So thank you so much, man. The opening music of this podcast is Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Thank you for listening to Phantom Thoughts. I would love to hear your feedback. You don't have to be part of the show. If you want to contact me and let me know, hey, these are for your eyes only. I just wanted to give you thoughts, ideas, response, and it's really for your eyes or ears only. That's absolutely fine. I'd love to hear from you either way. So just let me know when you contact me. I don't want to be part of the show. There are lots of different ways you can contact me. You can send me an email at phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. And that can be a regular email, or you can attach an audio file to it. You can use the message button on my podcast site on podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/phantom thoughts. You can contact me via my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. You can contact me via SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/phantom thoughts. You can contact me on Discord, The Pink Phantom. All this contact information is listed in the show notes of every episode. And thank you for those who call in. Thank you for those who don't call in. I appreciate you listening and hope you'll listen again next time. Until then, I hope you have a great day.